My lesson on Upstanders focused on writing editorials. My 7th grade honours students wrote editorials for the school newspaper. The standard that we were addressing, writing standard number 2 for 7th grade, students will write informative explanatory texts to examine a topic and convey ideas, concepts and information through the selection, organisation and analysis of relevant content. And this standard became very important as we worked our way through looking at what an editorial was, and so we'll talk about that in a moment. Let me talk just a little bit about how we got there. We started out by doing a lot of reading around the topic of Upstanders. We read fiction, we read literary non-fiction in the form of a biography piece about Eleanor Roosevelt. We viewed a couple of video clips on the topic of bullying. We read some newspaper articles, and we viewed a news article from an ABC News website. We amassed a lot of information, and students kept this information in, some of it was in their writers' notebooks that they keep in class, some of it was in the form of notes that they kept in their folders that they have on their desks all the time. So we amassed a lot of information, and our goal was to write an editorial. And so one of the things that we needed to do at that point was discover what an editorial is. So the writing portion of this lesson really took the form of a mini inquiry into what is an editorial. To help us with that, we read 3 separate editorials, all of which came from the Los Angeles Times. One of them we had read previously toward the beginning of the year, just as a piece that we were looking at, and we kept coming back to that one as a kind of touchstone for what we were doing. It was an editorial called "Bring Back the Tasty Tomatoes." We then followed that. We had talked about that extensively, looked at what the writer was doing, thought about some of the style and the diction that was involved there. We then followed that up by looking at when we started thinking about the editorials that we were going to write, we compared that editorial, "Bring Back the Tasty Tomatoes," with another piece from the LA Times, which is called "Go with the Flow," which is about global warming. It was actually from a slightly earlier period. It was from, I believe, 2009. We read that piece with an eye to not so much looking at the content of the piece, but looking at the structure and the organization of it. And we started making some observations about what editorial writers do. I told my students at this point that researchers, when they're researching, need to find multiple sources, and so we as researchers into editorials needed to triangulate our data. So we looked at a 3rd editorial. This one was called "The Getty is Getting It Right," which was about the Getty Museum returning some of its antiquities to the Greeks and to the Italians. Which was a really good piece for 7th graders because they had in 6th grade done a lot of work on Greece and Rome in their social studies, so they were very interested in that. We looked at "The Getty is Getting It Right," and again, we looked at how that piece was structured. As a result of those 3 pieces, we brainstormed a list of what we noticed about editorials. And what we noticed were these things on the chart behind me. We noticed that in editorials, the writer is using both expository and persuasive writing. It's a blend of genres. We noticed that there tends to be more information and opinion. The word "tends" became a really important word in our classroom at this point because I wanted to get away from the idea of a formula. I certainly did not want to give them a formula for writing an editorial, but we wanted to notice what editorial writers tend to do. So we started using the word "tends." So meaning that in most cases this is what seems to be happening, but it doesn't always happen that way. There tends to be more information than opinion. The information tends to come mostly at the beginning of the article. The opinions tend to be clustered near the end, although we notice that in some cases the opinions and the information are woven together throughout. The title serves as the hook for this piece. And this was a really important thing for us to notice because it came down to making sure that our editorials were short and concise, and so using the title as the hook took away from that focus on trying to, oh, what's my hook going to be? And we noticed also that there was always this important sentence or so at the beginning of an editorial that we call the gist, which gives a summary of the whole article in one sentence. For my 7th graders who are learning to write summaries, this idea of squeezing everything down into a single sentence became a big challenge and also a really important way to focus their thinking. So these were the things that we noticed about writing editorials. And I gave them then some guidelines, which are these. Some of this came from some information I got from by Googling writing an editorial. If you Google writing an editorial, you get lots of hits, one of which was a really nice piece about that set out some guidelines. I adapted those guidelines for my 7th graders. But this starts out by noting, what are the general characteristics of an editorial. Then some things that seem to be true of most editorials. Some of these connected to what we had already noticed, some of them were different to ours. For example, we hadn't thought particularly about the connection to a current news event, but that we noticed was of course true. We hadn't thought particularly about a historical figure up to that point, but we decided that was probably a good thing as well. So we looked at these bullet points, that the writer's opinions are expressed in a well-reasoned argument, which also goes along with the Common Core standards on argument writing. And this was their prompt. They were writing an editorial for the school newspaper, and in fact, some of them will indeed be published in the school newspaper. The prompt, what does it mean to be an upstander? Based on what you've learned from the text that you've read and viewed recently, write an editorial for the school newspaper in which you explain to your fellow students what an upstander is and how our school would benefit from having more upstanders on campus. Include both facts and well-supported opinions in your editorial, as well as examples of people who are or have been upstanders. And then for my 7th grade honours students, the real challenge was this last sentence. Your editorial should be no more than 500 words in length. This was something else we noticed by reading editorials. They tend to be between 450 and 500 words. So we decided we were going to be real journalists and we were going to write this in less than 500 words. My honours students somewhere down the line learned that more is better. And I'm trying to get them out of that habit. So learning to be concise and to the point was one of the big thrusts of what we did with this editorial. The process we went through is listed here as well. They had this huge amount of notes and ideas that we had amassed from all of our sources. So the first thing they did was gather all of those notes together, and they went through and they highlighted in their notes the things that they thought would be useful. Then they decided on what their opinion on this topic was. I should say, by the way, that we also at one point broadened the whole thing out so that they were not necessarily focusing only on bullying, although the examples you're going to read are both on bullying, but they also thought about other problems that they saw around school that could be assisted by having an upstanders, things such as cheating on tests, vandalism. We had a big scandal where people were stealing pizza from the cafeteria on pizza days, and so pizza was nixed for a while, so they thought an upstander could have made a difference there. So we broadened it out, and so they had a chance to choose. In their editorials, they were expected to explain what the facts are about whatever topic it was, in this case about bullying, and they were expected to define the terms upstander and bystander. We thought that it was also important to, we came up with these ideas as a class, it should be said, in discussion. We thought it was also important to note that being an upstander is not necessarily an easy thing to do, and that there may be consequences to being an upstander, and so we felt that was an important thing to be included here. But then also to explain why it's important to be an upstander in spite of the difficulties. And then we noticed also that editorials tend to end with a very dynamic concluding sentence. Just as it begins with the title as a hook and a gist sentence, they tend to end with a nice punchy concluding sentence. So that became a goal also, to end with that kind of call to action type of sentence. So I think we're ready to look at the student work. If you will turn to, you have two pieces. One is called Raising the Bar One Step Higher, and the other one is called Bystander or Upstander, Your Choice. Why don't we start with Raising the Bar One Step Higher? If you take a minute or two to read that. And you have there in front of you as well a copy of the rubric that I'm using to evaluate these pieces. I should say that the rubric that you have there is based on the district-wide rubric that we are, at least the school-wide rubric. We are the only middle school in our district, so we have our own rubric. This is the rubric that we use. It generally crosses genres, with the exception of the first row on ideas and development, which change from genre to genre. So this was the basic school rubric that I tweaked to fit with what we were doing with editorials. So the specific criteria for the editorial are in that first row there, ideas and development. The other boxes tend to be what we look for in most types of writing, but also fit with those bullet points that we just looked at.
Well, I noticed that your student is really implementing some of the things that they noticed when they read the editorials. He's using a title that's got a little hook and information heavy at the beginning. Yeah, he really seemed to be thoughtful about those criteria.
I like that he was able to look at a figure from the news, Michael Phelps, and what's going on there, and then taking that and making that connection between a real world situation kind of that everyone would know about, and then applying it to what's happening at their school, and that people need to step up because everyone has issues. And I think he had some really great facts to kind of support and make his writing really powerful. The fact where he talked about if a student is a bully by the age of 8, they're 4 more times likely to have a criminal record by the time they hit 30. I thought that the facts that he had input in here throughout his writing was really powerful.
And I was I'm wondering if you wanted examples of upstander, what an upstander might do as a middle school student, which I didn't see.
Right, yes.
And I don't know whether that's important enough, but when I'm reading it, I wanted to see
right.
what he
yes.
might think was.
Yes, and I think that's certainly a direction that the student could go in.
Almost like suggestions on what the kids could do,
or what he's seen other people do, or what.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I also think he made a very good point that it's difficult to be an upstander, and that you don't always have the support of adults because they don't know what's going on.
Right.
So he raises some very interesting issues for a young person trying to grapple with the topic.
Yes.
I think he stuck to the prompt very well because you asked them to explain what an upstander is and how the school would benefit, and he's very focused on exactly what an upstander is. He gives his example, and then he gives examples of how upstanders could help the school in different situations where an upstander would have been needed or would have been good to have around.
I don't know if this is the time to ask this question or not. I'm struck by how well they followed the criteria, how seamlessly actually a lot of the criteria are embedded here. And I'm wondering if the word limit started getting in the way of some things that could be enhanced or embellished, like the what could we actually do, an example of that. But I there's something about that middle what does an upstander think of them as superheroes? There's something there where it comes to life. And there's a lot more life toward the end than there is at the beginning. And then I'm wondering if he would have gotten there, but he ran out of words.
Right, I have 18
You know?
words left. I can't.
Yeah, I can't do this in 18 words, but very knowledgeable application of the genre. I'm very struck by that.
I was wondering, Liz, were your kids used to looking at writing from this and following the trend and looking for that, dissecting the writing first before, using a mentor text to figure out what it needs to look like, instead of just giving them a formula, but allowing them to explore that kind of freedom in their writing?
Yes, I try to do a lot of that.
I just can't see where this would respond to formula, any type of a formula. Like, they just needed to grapple with the criteria, grapple with the different techniques that an editorial writer would use, and then try them on for size. He did a great job. And that is really stylish, this move he did in the middle, right?
I thought so
It's an
too.
upstander.
I wouldn't have thought of that.
I like that too. I wanted to say that these are, in fact, intermediate drafts. They're currently, right now, working on their final drafts. And so one of the things that we talked about when I gave them feedback on these intermediate drafts was exactly what you were saying, Jane, about how can we pack enough information in and still keep it within this small package. And so what comes next here on the way to final drafts will be some lessons on things like sentence combining, idea combining, how to cut down on repetition, how to say things in a briefer and more concise way. So this was really their first pass at doing this within a word limit, and I think exactly what you were saying did happen, but there are going to be some lessons following up on this that hopefully will help with that.
I have a question. I agree with everything that's been said, but the second paragraph here where they mentioned something that happened on your campus, that to me was like, it left me hanging.
Yes.
And if I were speaking with this student, maybe I'd say, come back to that at the end and tell us what might have happened or something that could have been done. So that doesn't occur again.
I think that's a really good point, and again, that's one of the next steps here is to tie those examples in. Many of them I found were finding good examples of Upstanders, but they weren't necessarily tying it to the main idea. So that again is a next step that we'll be taking.
And I noticed you have the little arrow there because the survey.
That was the student's own arrow.
Because where does it come from? Because my students always say, well, who did that?
It just means that she meant to indent there and she forgot. But before she started, she realised, oops, I forgot to indent. So she drew a little arrow to say that she meant to indent.
But I guess my question would be, where did that survey
Right.
come
and so
from?
one of the other things that, and this again takes us to next steps, one of the other things that we noticed about editorials, which actually made my kids really excited, was that editorial writers don't cite their sources.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was thinking of that.
However, one of our next steps with this whole thing, I think, is going to be to upload these pieces to possibly a website or maybe a wiki, somewhere digital, and have them include hyperlinks to their sources. So they will link to the survey. We actually read this infographic on bullying, which is where most of them got their statistics from. But we noticed that editorial writers don't necessarily say where their sources were from. So again, we were being like journalists, and they thought that was very exciting.
That is fun, that takes a lot of work.
But now they are going to have to cite the sources.
A lot of times it's even, you won't even find something like a recent Pew survey
Yes.
Yeah.
found.
Right.
They really
don't. It's true. It's true.
It's a good thing for kids to know, actually.
Yeah. And we even talked about, what does this mean in terms of, should you be going back, if you're reading an editorial, should you be fact checking and making sure that what they're saying is accurate? Should we move on to the second piece? Bystander or upstander, your choice.
My first thought was, wow, this was it was very readable. I liked the way it flowed, and I loved his or her perspective of Martin Luther King, he got arrested a few times. And that everyone's treated equally, which I think is, I appreciate the,
Seventh grade logic.
the childlike, yes. But I thought it was very well written and followed your guidelines, and I really enjoyed reading it.
Oh, good, thank you. This is a girl, by the way.
I think this one, she had great things. I like the way she defined the bystander. I like the way that she, explained the difference between bystander and an upstander. She also had really good facts, but I don't know it had the same pull to pull me into her editorial as the first one did. There was something, especially the way he asked that question in the middle, what is an upstander, that kind of really pulled you into his editorial. And this one just seemed more informational. It just listed the information there. And I don't know that it piqued my interest in the same way the other one did.
It didn't pack as powerful a punch, I don't think. The way it's structured is more narrative, and so I guess what we're noticing is the lack of persuasive. There's not as much persuasion going on in this piece. She's more narrative and just talking about what she knows, what things have happened, and it flows.
But it's not good narrative, not to make a evaluative judgment. I can't find it in the word right now. It's general narrative.
Right.
I was thinking along, the other piece built up momentum.
Yes.
That's a good way to
And
put
this
it.
piece has more momentum at the beginning. Some of those early paragraphs are much better.
Yes.
Now, it actually could be, though, because this is a hard topic, and when you're trying to pose solutions, it's going to get more general, which it does. But it's reminding me that kids need to learn how to take what they know how to write in writing good narratives, and be able to still have a scenario that's got life in 2 or 3 sentences.
Yeah.
I wonder what happens if she turned Martin Luther King into a scenario.
Yeah. Yes.
I think this piece of writing has a lot of potential through revision, and it's a great opportunity for the student to have conversations about analysis. You've named these upstanders, and you said that they've stood up, but you haven't really explained how and what impact that has made. And so, just to kind of help the student pull out that information and analyze and comment on it.
I
think that's a really good point.
Livingston.
Right.
And I still don't know.
She stood up for herself.
Right.
I think that's a really key point. I think even more than the first piece, this writer has some good examples that she's found in various places, but she hasn't really tied them together.
Yeah.
So that's where we need to go, is to kind of get away from this sort of
And they are good
drop of
examples.
information.
Right.
They are
She
good
has
examples.
great information.
She doesn't know how to explain the connection between
Exactly.
her examples and what she's trying to say about upstanders.
Yes.
I still felt that she did a better job of explaining than the first.
Did you?
To me,
Yes.
the first piece was disjointed, and I could see actually this first piece starting in the middle, that would be the beginning,
Okay.
and then maybe, and I don't know, maybe another piece for the school. He has 2 pieces here to me.
That's
Interesting.
This was,
an interesting observation. Yes, I can see that.
And this looks like something I would see in my newspaper. That doesn't mean it's good. But to me, it was much more readable, and I could follow along with her points better than I could with the first
Is
one.
part of it because, and I think this is where, I had never thought of the title being the hook. I don't know why. It's just not, I don't write a lot of editorials. I don't do anything in 500 words. I think part of it is, though, even set up by what they chose to write about. This one is definitely more about bullying.
Yes.
And this one definitely examines bystander, not upstander, in a different way.
Yes.
And they both have very different things they've got to work on.
Yes. Yes.
Anyway,
I think so.
Yeah, I
about
think
6 more minutes if we stick to the time, but we don't have to.
I think this will benefit from a further editing when she can be more concise about, this is an upstander, this is a bystander. It sounds a little bit repetitive.
Yes.
Be a bystander, I mean, don't be a bystander, be an upstander, be an upstander.
Right.
If she can concise that and develop some of the other things, so we get more of a feeling of this, like Jane said, the scenarios, so we feel more drawn to it.
Yes, I think so. I think that's a really key point. And this was, I would have to say, a totally new kind of writing for my kids. They had never written anything that even remotely resembled this before. So I was actually very pleased with the way that, first of all, the way that they jumped into it with both feet and without fear, and also with the way that these drafts came out. I should say that these, as I said before, these are second drafts. They had done a first draft, and on that first draft they did peer review. So they sat in their small writing groups and they read each other's papers. They gave each other feedback in the form of post-it notes, which they wrote to each other with something that they really liked about the piece and some suggestions for what perhaps the writer could do about it. These second drafts are a result of that revision, and then I conferenced with and gave them written feedback on this particular draft, and right now they are somewhere at home, bless their hearts, working on their final drafts, which are due next week. But a lot of what we talked about was this idea of, while we're mindful of the word count, and I didn't really want the word count to become a huge issue, but they actually seemed to see it as a challenge. They kind of wanted to try to do that. But I wanted them to get the idea of being concise, of not being repetitive, of saying something once and then moving on. But then turned out that I also needed to tell them about tying everything together, which I hadn't really foreseen when we started out on this. So I think all of that is coming into play, and as I say, in the future, meaning next week, there are some lessons on sentence combining and stating an idea briefly and concisely, and still making it pack a punch, which I think will serve them well as they go down the road.
Well, I think for a first attempt at having a seventh grader write an editorial, they did a really great job of taking their topic, expressing their ideas, and making us care about the topic. So, I mean, they did a really good job.
And I think they were extremely thoughtful about the criteria that together you extracted.
Right.
I really like the student's title here, bystander or upstander, your choice. And as I was thinking about it, and then what she really says in the piece, it'd be interesting to have her go back and maybe identify which paragraphs do you talk about a bystander and which paragraphs do you talk about an upstander. Do you really, at the end, when you're sending your readers away, are you really kind of asking them to make that choice, or can we make that a little more clear so that it really attaches to the title?
Good point. Yes, yes, that is a good point. Yes, they had fun coming up with titles, and again, we had to make sure that it wasn't just something they were attaching to it with no reason. And similarly with the just sentence as well, they needed to really be thoughtful about how to summarize the whole thing in one sentence. Some of those were more successful than others.
Did you make this rubric?
As I said, it's based on our school-wide rubric that we use for all genres, but I tweaked it to fit with what we were doing with editorials.
It's very impressive, and I like that you chose an editorial to address this issue. It was very unique, and I was very impressed with what you did and all the work that you did ahead of time.
Real world.
Yeah.
Well, and I like that you're actually giving the kids the opportunity to publish them by putting them in the school's newspaper so that they had a purpose for writing.
Yes.
And that they knew that there was something else out there that they could then do and that would be published.
Yes, we're going to, probably two of them will be, I have two classes that have done this, and so they're going to read each other's editorials. We're going to swap from class to class, and they're going to vote on the one from each class that they like best, and those two will be published in the last edition of the school newspaper for this year.
That's great.
Wow.
So we'll get to see final drafts and
Yes,
which get published.
yes.
Okay. No, I really do. I want, not just these two, but I want to see more.
I'm so excited anytime students have the opportunity to really examine real-world genre in the classroom.
It was very exciting.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it's not like they're going to come across 5-paragraph essays
Exactly.
to talk about. This is how people communicate persuasively to the public.
Yes.
Letters to the
Well,
editorials.
this will be my last statement, then I really will shut up. What this close examination of the genre is also gonna do for their reading of editorials, their looking at, as they get older, pundits on the news, some of these blog sites,
Yes.
opinion-driven blog sites. I never did this with students. Big mistake.
Liz, have you
Well
noticed
done.
a difference in your kids' behaviors about being more upstanding after they've done this?
Somewhat. I've noticed that they talk about it a lot more, and I noticed the terms coming up in other pieces of writing, and even when we're talking about literature, they're beginning to think of people in terms, the characters in what we're reading in terms of, oh, so-and-so was an upstander, if only there had been an upstander there. So it's beginning to filter through and make a difference, and they are talking about it. Like when we had this whole Pizzagate incident, we were actually right at the beginning of this editorial writing, and they were talking about the fact that, oh, that was a place where if someone had seen what was going on, they could have been an upstander and said something about it, and then we wouldn't have had pizza banned for 3 weeks.
Pizzagate.
Yeah, no pizza for 3 weeks.
Great.
Thank you.